today, you know what? I think we're gonna, one of the topic that we're going to talk about today. Um, it's probably the most important topic, especially if you're a broker, to truly grasp, to harness, and to bring in to help you develop that next level relationship, that next level, and really design your career.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Yeah, that important. That important.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff. Good morning, Lisa.
Good morning, Jeff. Morning, Lisa.
We're rocking here this morning. All the high performers back in it this morning, my friends. Yes, sir.
Yes.
So, Dean, we've touched on this point numerous times. And when Dean and I were communicating back and forth saying, what's the topic for today? And when he said, why don't we do this? I was like, oh, because this is a topic that I think as a broker, if you don't understand, I really don't think you're being the best partner. You're being one-sided as opposed to relationship-driven, like you're being singular-driven, is operating costs and what it really costs to operate a truck and what it really costs to operate a company truck versus an owner-operator truck. Let me ask you this, and for all of you thinking before we dive into this, have you ever had you put a load out on the link or on the DAT or on the ITS load board or whatever, if you're using ITS, you should probably go to DAT and link. But whoa, you see that plug? Did you see that plug quick? You see that? And did anyone catch that? No? Okay. And then you get a call, right? And the carrier says, I'll do it for $1,500. You're like, $1,500? Wow, that's a pretty damn good rate. Okay, I'll take it. And then an hour before the load picks up, you got a call back. They're like, yeah, sorry, the truck broke down. Well, the truck didn't break down. They got $1,700 or $1,800. Right. And I remember saying to one person one time going, okay, so just be straight with me. Like, did you get another load? Just be straight, be honest. And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, okay, but here's my thing. You called me and told me you needed $1,500. He says, yeah, but the going rate's 18. I said, but then why did you say 15? And it's funny because you know what he said to me? He says, so why did you take 15 instead of saying, well, the going rate's 18. Why don't you need 18? And I went, and I stopped because he was right. And I was right. He called me and said he wants 15. So as a broker, and this was early in my career, I'm going to take the $1,500. Yeah, I remember it vividly, because it was from Jersey to Toronto. I remember it vividly. It was from Newark, New Jersey, from custom building products going to Anatolia Tile in Woodbridge, Ontario. I remember the load. I remember the company. I remember Terry, the traffic manager at Custom Building Products in Bridgeport, New Jersey. Like I remember it like it was yesterday. And when he said, well, why did you take it at 15? I said, well, why didn't you offer me 18? They said, I just thought maybe you had like a really good load going down. Because at that point, line hauls to Jersey were like $500. And then they made their money coming back, right? For a $2,000 round trip kind of thing. And he says, well, but you didn't ask. And I think we both had points. I was pissed off, so I didn't really get his point at that point in time. As we most of the time when we're pissed off, we don't get the other person's point. But it was interesting because it taught me a lesson. And I said, I really need to understand operating costs. And ever since then, I can't tell you how many times I've had suppliers say, and it's mainly from spot posts from load boards, right? Like when you're going into dedicated or relationship driven, you have these conversations where, the going rate will be $1,500. Somebody will call up and say, I'll do it for 13. I'll say, but the going rate's 50. And they'll say, yeah, but I really need a load. I said, okay, well, you're the first one that called. Can you meet these parameters? Yes. So I'll give you 15. Like, stop dropping your shorts just to try and get the load. If you can meet the parameters, you deserve the going rate. You deserve what we're going to pay. Now, some brokers that probably won't post it publicly, but they'll say, no, fuck that. I'll take the $1,300 all day long and make an extra 2 bills in my pocket. Okay, you will. And you'll soon not have capacity, which we'll talk about today. So that's kind of my initial story into this operating cost. Dean, DJ, you got one like that or?
Yeah. So I'm glad we're even talking.
I'm actually really glad your internet is on par today.
Me too.
Actually, have a conversation.
Me too, because that was very frustrating yesterday. But
I know. You know what, brother? I have to say, and I don't mean to interrupt you. I have to say, you handled it like a champ. because not once did you lose your smile. And I know you were so frustrated because even when the show ended, you cut off. And I'm like, he was so mad because you just
I was so frustrated, dude. I'm like, why is this finally? And here we go. I'm going in and out. I can't even tell when I'm talking. But
yeah,
it was crazy. But we're good today. Knock on wood. But to your point, we've talked about this a lot with Dean. We've talked about that percentage number to watch out for the carriers so that they don't have the same situation that we had. But I think this is even bigger than this industry. It's something that a lot of businesses just don't. I think it's part of the head. There's not enough transparency of this is the cost, guys. Like this is what it costs. Like this is how much it costs. Certain companies. Dan, you talked about how much it costs to actually just
invoice
the billing and everything for an actual tender one load.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a lot of companies talk about that. And a lot of companies at the same time, we're bringing in millions. Well, if you're bringing in millions and it's costing you more than the millions you're bringing in, you're losing money. But nobody really is focusing on and really opening up the true cost. And I think we've talked a lot about transparency. And I think this just goes a lot to transparency. It's just, we need more of it and more of the focus on it.
And education. Right? Like
yes.
Brokers need to understand operating costs.
Yes.
Brokers need to understand when things happen in the market, this is why this fluctuation happens. And Dean is like, and Dean, I don't mean to talk about you like you're not here, but you really are, my friend, the master at it, because you're explaining to people and saying, listen, when 37 jumbo jets come in with flowers, don't expect Florida rates to be the same they were last week. And as a broker, as a professional, as a high performer, as somebody that says, here's the change curve, I'm going to be out here and my customer is going to be out here. So when it does happen, we've already passed that change curve, saying, hey, FYI, hey, Mr. Prospect, where do you ship from? Oh, I ship from Miami and I go all the way to Vancouver, Canada. I go to Chicago, Illinois, and I go to Newark, New Jersey. Okay, perfect. How often do you ship? I ship 4 times a week, all year long. Okay. Do you have troubles during these periods? Why, yes, I do. Okay, here's the reason why. Now you're of value to the prospect instead of just, trying to get freight, if that makes sense. Right?
Yeah. And Dean, yeah, definitely. But I think, Dan, if you want to take that, but to your point, Dan.
Yeah, good morning, Toussaint. Can we ask Toussaint in the comments if we can mention his name and question from last week about operating costs?
I guess we can.
Sorry. I wasn't here last week, so I didn't know. So Toussaint, you had a question.
Anyway, so that was the topic of the week.
So
he asked a great question. And,
it's a live show. What can I say? It's a live show.
Oh yeah, Toussaint, we gotta ask you now.
Toussaint, can we? Okay, so we're gonna talk about your question last week. Sorry, I should have asked. I apologize. I didn't.
That's okay.
I'm putting on my glasses. I just told you guys my eyes are going. I'm putting on my glasses. I'm like, wait, let me read this from Toussaint here.
Well, he asked a great question, and it's a question I get asked fairly often, especially since diesel prices have gone through the roof, and obviously operating costs also. And he watched Jeff and I last week, and he's laughing. And he asked a great question, and he asked about operating costs and how we arrived at some of the numbers. And I think last week it was about $2.01 per mile or something about that. And Toussaint said, I want to be fair to the motor carrier to make sure they're providing, getting enough money to run their truck and focusing on relationships. All those things that we talk about, we've been preaching about for years. So it was a really good question, and I shared with him some information, and which we'll talk about now, because it's one of the questions that A, I've been asked about, but B, I've been challenged on. And it's a really interesting question. Some of the big carriers, and especially the big box retailers that have got big fleets, have sort of questioned the numbers, because they, obviously they pay a lot of owner operators as little as they can. That's normal business. A lot of operators don't know their operating costs either, in defense of the shippers. So this is a free market. Everybody's got to know what they're doing and understand their operating costs. But this takes me back to 1990, when I wrote an economic viability report for the Australian Trucking Association, when I was general manager of the Australian Trucking Association, and I wrote a viability report that said that the industry is not viable under its current, in its current form, because carriers weren't generating enough rate per mile, but B, they weren't getting a return on the capital employed. And by that, I mean, if you had $80,000 in equity in the truck, that $80,000 would be earning what in the bank? And if your rate per mile is not generating a return on the capital it's employed, eventually you go so far in the hole, you can't buy a new truck. You're always trading down because you're never keeping your equity intact. So that was a concept that a lot of carriers had never thought about. They just thought they could make enough money magically. Long story short, this economic viability report upset so many of the large carriers that were ahead of the association, they buried it. They actively went out of their way and buried the report because they didn't want the industry to know how bad they were performing financially, because a lot of the smaller guys provide the capacity for the larger fleets. Mm-hmm. And so this is a fairly well documented drama that went on. It was actually ended up in a court case, but some people that I know selectively released the report and made sure that everything got out. And by the way, before I go too far, great job, Jeff and DJ, for keeping the show going last week. Kudos to you guys.
Huge.
But to answer the question, a report came out this week from ATRI. ATRI is the American Transportation Research Institute. It's the research arm of the American Trucking Association. Every year they do a report that comes out and says, here's a survey and here are what the operating costs are to operate a truck, both cents per mile and hourly. So it kind of validated my numbers, because today, I've been saying to you, when diesel was at $5.80, I think we were around at $2.11 per mile for an owner-operator. Now diesel's back at $4.91. It's down to $1.99 operating costs for an owner-operator. So why do I pick an owner-operator? It's because that's kind of the lowest common denominator in the industry. The guy that has the least buying power, the least purchasing power, can't get volume discounts, pays retail for fuel at the pump, probably carrying his customers' debts too long. What else is there? Can't hedge, can't buy fuel. He's not buying rack.
Can't buy bulk tires,
so
can't buy, going to regular service stations.
And really subject to market volatility, especially if they're in the spot market. So I look at the viability of a guy that's kind of girl, that's kind of the lowest common denominator, the most common carrier in the industry, to see where they sit. So at $1.99 today for an owner-operator, that's about where we'd expect them to be if large fleets are at $1.85, because we know there's always 15 to 20 cents per mile more for the small fleet carrier. So I'll show you some of the numbers just to give you a sense of what it really costs to run a truck these days. And these are some pretty accurate numbers. Remember, this is the same truck I've been running for 18 months now, and it's based on actual owner-operator input costs, including my own. Fixed costs are about 47 cents a mile. Variable costs are about $1.53. Breaking that down, finance costs are about 31 cents a mile. Insurance, 12. Fuel is 76 cents per mile today. 76.
How many miles a week are you basing this on?
We're doing 100,000 miles a year and 15,000 empty. So it's a real long haul operation, right? And that's where it's the hardest, because your rates are the lowest on the longer hauls. Yeah. Right, your rate per mile kind of decreases as your length of haul gets out. So 76 cents a mile today in fuel. Last year it was 52 cents a mile. So I'm paying a lot more per mile just for fuel. Even though fuel has come down, it's still about 32% of revenue. Now, remember, on the show, going back to last year, whenever fuel is more than 25% of revenue, that's economic, that's lack of viable performance. You're gonna get into trouble eventually. The only thing that's saving a lot of carriers when fuel is at 32% of revenue today is the fact that line haul rates are still historically high, and they're coming off a really good year. All right. So fuel is high. That's the biggest cost right now. The other big one, wages. I've got wages set at 61 cents a mile for an owner-operator. You could adjust that down and lower your operating costs. But remember, the big fleets are paying 50 to 60 cents a mile for company drivers. And what's really interesting with that number, this is kind of a bit of a segue, but I saw some data that came out from 10 Street yesterday that drivers that were hired in June last year, only 48% of them stayed more than a year. The average tenure of drivers, company fleet drivers that were hired in June last year was 233 days, 8 months. Right. And so even though wages are up and drivers are coming back to the market and there's more applications, they're still quitting at a fairly high rate because it's a really tough job. So operating costs, when you strip out fuel at 76, when you strip out fuel from your operating costs, it's about $1.24 to run the truck for all of your other costs. So these are real numbers. If you want to go to attri.org, you can download their latest report. Now, just the caveat with the Attri report this year, there's been a big shift in the demographic. It says that the average cost to run a fleet is $1.85 per mile. But the difference this year is they've had a big shift in their respondents. I think that's the right word. So this year, 26% of the respondents are truckload carriers, 56% are LTL, right? And 18
cost, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to weigh this on the right scales. So the truckload that had 26% of their survey were truckload, 57% of the industry are in truckload. So it's not representative necessarily, but it's in the ballpark. Now that was a big shift because they had around 50% truckload last year. So for some reason, we've had less truckload carriers. So keep an eye on that with that lens. But historically, it's a really accurate report because it captures essentially all of the big operating costs that a carrier has gone through. So even at $1.85, when I look at my operating costs for a fleet, when I look at my fleet operating costs, I had them at $1.93 today. If they're at $1.85 as of 2021 data, excluding the big jump in diesel, my numbers of a large fleet at $1.93 are probably not too far off. Okay, so for all of you buying capacity, when a driver's talking about a rate per mile, if they're not talking to you about something north of $1.90, they're probably either trying to get somewhere where there's a better rate. It could be a backhaul. It could be there could be a deadhead margin factored in. There could be a big freight imbalance. They may have to get home on a weekend. But across the span of time, they've got to be looking at north of $1.90 to be economically viable. And if you're buying capacity and you want someone to be around for a long time, that's what they need to run. Now, the smart guys are not focusing on the rate per mile as much. They're focusing on revenue per day. And we touched on this last week. They're looking for $1,500 a day, $1,200 to $1,500 a day. And they will say to you, I will give you all the capacity in the world if you can get me $1,200 to $1,500 a day. So, and that's where I think a lot of brokers run into trouble, because they'll give you a 600-mile haul that takes 2 days. That's no good for a carrier, because 600 miles is a day's work. You've got to get that load off in a day and reloaded and gone. So if you give me a 600-mile load that takes 2 days, I'm making about $750 a day on average. So that's why it's because time is the big constraint these days. It's not just the rate per mile. It's how long does it take the load to get loaded and get unloaded, and the transit time. And there's sort of the big factors that carriers have to work on these days, because ELDs have really put a limit on how many miles they can physically drive each week, notwithstanding all the guys that have got pre-2000 trucks running around.
I was at a business meeting. I went to a meeting yesterday. I'm one of my customers. I'm getting set up for the next couple of weeks, because I expect my energy level and like my voice and things to start getting shot over the next couple of weeks as I get further into radiation. And in setting it up, we're having a conversation. There's a big flatbed carrier in this company. And he says, the way we've set it up is, he says, it's mainly owner operators, and we've set them up for success, because he said, we've had way too many leave. And they're not happy or whatever. He says, it's all about the loads. And he says, in every load, they got it down to the penny. Like, there's one load where they put $400 in their pocket after all expenses. And there's another load where, based on the time, it's $300. And he says, so there's one driver there. He says, this guy is just a go-getter. He says, but you know what he did, Dan? He's made friends with everybody on his route. Like he is best friends. When they see him pull in, they almost stop everything they're doing. They go and unload him, and then they and he's gone. And it's funny because he I said, so he's successful. He goes, he made over $190,000 last year.
Right.
As a driver doing, I don't necessarily if it's local because it'd be about 250-mile runs. Like what would be considered local, Dean? Just local around town, or would that be like a mid?
250 would be probably 250 is getting into the regional type haul, but
regional.
Local to me is kind of metropolitan. You know, like you're within 100 miles of your sort of your domicile base. You're probably not. You don't. If you're under 100-mile air radius from your base, you don't need an ELD device, right? So that's part of the. So you're probably, you're running 12 hours a day because you can run 12 hours a day.
Well, you can in Canada, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 12s are 60, so that gets you to your 60 limit. But you've got to keep it. There's got to be a record of duty status for drivers. So I would say they're the kind of guys I would call local, the 100-mile air radius. I think it's actually 150 mile now. Stand corrected.
Okay.
It's 150 miles.
So this guy's awesome. And what he did is he took what we talk about, make relationships with your suppliers, and he's taken it because he says, and when my buddy asked me, he says, so why did you do that? He goes, listen, this is my business.
Right.
He goes, I count on. He goes, I look at it like an engine, and very smart guy, like very smart. And I think this is the bubble that needs to burst. Like a lot of drivers are very smart, some not, but just like some business people are dumb as doornails and eat rocks for breakfast. Like it's normal, but he says, here's the thing, my business is the engine, and this gear turns. And if this gear is not greased or not turning properly, it's struggling this gear. Right. He says, when your business works, every gear is working. Exactly. So when he's on his way to a delivery or when he's on his way to a pickup and he stops at Tim's or something to grab a coffee, he goes, I'll grab a Take 10. It's $12 out of my pocket. And I'll just drop a box of coffee on the table and say, I was just at Tim's on the way. I figured I'd grab you guys this. And they're like, oh my God, thank you. He goes, and over the time, he goes, I just, when I go to Tim's, it's for $13. Every time I go to Tim's, it's $13 because he gets his $2 coffee and an $11 Take 10. He goes, so big deal. I spend $35 a week. I spend, maybe $200 a month on coffee, but I take 37 minutes is the max I'm unloading an entire flatbed at construction sites, at companies. And he goes, and I see drivers in there that sit there for 2 hours because they're bitching, they're complaining, they're like, there's too much dust, and he goes, and I come in and I'm like, hey guys, stop at Tim's today, or and he goes, and when I don't, man, I didn't stop at Tim's today, but I promise I'll stop tomorrow. The lineup was hectic. I just wanted to make sure I get here. And he's developed a business, a sustainable business. And that's the flip side of everything.
And that's why drivers love predictability, because they can build relationships and look after freight and enjoy the day.
Well, and Dan, we talk about it all the time, but it's difference between a professional and somebody who is just working a job, who really isn't taking this as their career, doing this to be their career. They're just going through the motion.
So I just
posted
a link
Jeff's
from
message.
Dean. I just posted a link from Dean.
That's the ATRI report. That's the ATRI report with operating costs. Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to find LinkedIn, gents. Everybody, sorry, bear with me 1 second here.
So I'll just sort of segue there to your next topic. But the point I was making about operating costs at $1.99. You say, well, okay, well, what are carriers really earning? Well, the national average van rate this week's $1.95, right? So that's excluding fuel. So we're only a couple of pennies below what it costs me to operate a truck and draw a good wage. So there is no doom and gloom. There is no disaster. There is no bloodbath. There is no purge. That's all just, headline grabbing rubbish, because the carriers people forget carriers had a really good year last year. And you watch again. Next week is brake check week. So, like International Road Check Week in May, you see carriers take vacation time, right? And it was just, I think it was Memorial Day, thereabouts, was nearby. So over those 2 weeks, I saw a lot of carriers take the entire 2 weeks off. and because they wanted to have time off with their families because they've made such good money in the last year. I suspect next week is brake safety week, and then you've got the week after, I think, is Labor Day. I wouldn't mind betting you'll see a similar repeat there where carriers take time off again. Because remember, about 90% of trucks that go through inspection week don't have any violations whatsoever. But the fact that you go through one, you could easily burn up 3 or 4 hours, and that is a major headache. Why? It's not the hours; it's the fact it puts you off cycle for your load that day or pick up the next morning. You could easily lose $1,500 in opportunity costs right there with an inspection. So a lot of guys find this, inconvenient, not because they don't run good gear. It's because of the time penalty that's incurred. So that's part of the reason you'll see a capacity hit next week. But my broader point is operating costs are about $1.99 for the lowest common denominator in the industry. The reality is that we're only just shy of that in terms of where rates are sitting. Rates are forecast to go up between now and the end of the year. The bigger problem is going to be next year. First quarter next year is going to be a really tough quarter for carriers. They need to be putting money aside right now for the next quarter.
Because of the volume dip, you mean?
Yeah, there's going to be a big slowdown, I think. Big slowdown. Inflation's going to have its full effect. After Christmas, things generally slowed anyway. So Q1's always a quiet quarter. Mm-hmm. So remember, even though the national average line haul rate's $1.95 this week, on our top 50 lanes by volume, it's $2.40 a mile. Right, so that on a lane by lane basis, you will see a lot of variation, as you would normally expect, because an average is made up of highs and lows across tens of thousands of lanes every week. So there's a lot of carriers out there that are still running very profitably, and they're still doing exceptionally well and providing really good levels of service. But the market clearly has turned in terms of its cycle. We're seeing contract rates come down slightly. New rates entering routing guides have clearly peaked and are starting to back off a bit. The last data showed, we shared it last week, they're seeing somewhere between 8 and 12% reduction in contract rates from their incumbent carriers. Carriers, I think, would like to hold firm on their numbers because of the driver wage costs that they've had to introduce to attract and keep drivers. So I don't know that you'll see much reduction. Contract rates will come down. Spot rates will continue to go up and down. You'll see a bit of a bump again around Thanksgiving into the holiday season, and then you'll see rates fall off again in the new year until April, and then they'll pick back up again. So normal seasonal patterns. But you've got to watch your lanes, because some lanes have a lot of capacity imbalances. When you're trying to bid for capacity, you can't just assume that because rates are low that every carrier is going to accept every bid, because it really depends on the lane they want to run and what the freight balance looks like in either direction.
Mm-hmm. We got some comments here. We got good morning, Samantha. Welcome.
Good morning, Samantha.
Thank you.
Hey, can you throw up Jeff's comment, because I want to talk about
terrible results. You know what? I'm backwards. Sorry, guys. You think I've never done this before?
So he says
a week here, and I'm going backwards on the comments, gents. I've preached this for my whole career. Shippers need to understand carrier needs and costs. It's all about collaboration. Work from the inside out and continue to educate your prospects and clients. 100%.
So to Jeff's point, guys, any brokers that are listening to this right now. So Dean gave information that me for 5 years has been on a search of, and nobody seems to give a good answer. I've asked so many carriers. I've asked so many people I work with, what is your cost? Like, tell me, what is your cost? I need to know. I want to know. And the only reason I had that question was because of great shippers like Jeff. The shippers who are seasoned, the shippers who care about the industry, the shippers who are out there, and there are some that are out there, they know the cost. If that lane runs at this time of the year at this rate and you're shooting some low rates, they're going to say, no, that's BS, and they're going to call you out on it. I had that happen to me. That's why I know. Again, it was when I tried to dip my foot into produce early in being in this industry. And the guy just put me in my place, like, no, you can't get that. That's impossible. And I'm like, what? How do you know? And so then he actually took the time and gave me the information like Jeff would. But again, I think it's those guys who are seasoned. That's why they end up in produce to begin with.
DJ, you're multi-leveled on that. And I love that you brought that up, because you're talking cost to a shipper. Dean's talking cost to a truck. So there's multiple layers of cost to understand.
Absolutely.
When Jeff was a shipper, he needed to understand his cost. Now, Jeff might have dug in a little bit in understanding the carrier costs, but most of the time, and knowing the years Jeff was in that shipper field, a lot of carriers would have held that cost close to their chest because God forbid they make money, right? So we are talking multiple layers or levels, if you will. Let's call it levels instead of layers, because layers kind of a, but you have a level of what's my carrier cost, what's the price they want. So they have and this is where Dean, you've talked about it numerous times, how much is left on the table? Leave something for somebody else. So you got carrier cost, carrier needs to make money. Broker needs to make money in order to carry their costs, because as we've said before, if you're in a brokerage company, if you work for a brokerage company and you do not understand your invoice costs, or your company does not want to share what it costs to invoice an order, run. Run. And I don't care what company you're at. I'll call out all of you big 3-letter name companies out there, because run. If you do not understand what it costs to invoice an order, and you're supposed to be an asset to a company you work for, you're in trouble. It's just like any business owner. You say to a business owner, what does it cost for you to acquire a customer? What does it cost for you to keep a customer after a year? What is your customer cost after 2 years? If an owner does not understand that, do not work for them, because you're a recipe for disaster. Look, I remember when I was working for a major third-party logistics company, I was like, what does it cost? And when I finally started digging and talking to people, they're saying $70 an order. So every order that came in the door cost $70 to produce an invoice and hold a receivable to the customer. That means your invoice cost is $70. If your invoice cost is $70 and you go into a deal or a contract or whatever, and you're making $50 an order because you're talking, I'm making big volume, your company is losing $20 an order.
Losing $20 every single load.
But most people, DJ, would say, well, I'm doing 5 loads a day. It's $50 a load. It's the same carrier. It's one load sheet. It's easy peasy. Okay. But again, listen to what I just said. One load sheet, easy peasy. That's one invoice. So if you have 5 loads, you're making $250 on the one invoice. It costs $70 to invoice that load. You're making money. If you're sending 5 load sheets, 5 invoices, 5 receivables, 5 all, then you're not. Now you're losing, right? So there's that variable. So the layers that we can get into when it comes to costs are crazy. But number one, know your cost, know your supplier's cost, and if you don't know your company's cost, so let me rephrase this. If your company doesn't want to share it with you, I believe you're working for the wrong company, especially if you're watching this show. Because this show is for high performers. This show is for people that truly care, and this is a career, and they want to design their life around their career, and they want to design their life in this industry. Transparency is key, and if you don't work for a company that's transparent, just do yourself a favor, because 10 years down the road, you're just going to wish you left 10 years earlier. Go build your business. Go build your life, your career. Go design that ultimate freedom, that ultimate personal freedom we all strive for. Go design that at a company that works with you. That would be my
So Dean, to you, thank you for sharing that, because literally for 5 years I was searching for somebody to give me a good breakdown of that. So
I mean, he's right. Most carriers don't know their costs, but I think that in their defense, and the caveat to everything I've said today is there is no right or wrong answer.
No.
Because everybody's costs are different. This is why you've got to have really good partners and really good open discussions. Because if I'm at $2 a mile and I already own my own truck, right? I've got an 8-year-old Kenworth and I own my own trailer. I could wipe out 30 cents a mile right there and forget about the return on capital piece, right? Now, I'll eventually have to trade down and buy a bigger POS because I'm not getting any return on capital. But I could run for $1.70 a mile if I own my own truck outright. Now, so when you talk to capacity, when you're trying to buy capacity, everybody's going to have a different number in their mind, because it really depends on their operation, their engine, their trailer, their tires, their speed.
How much they're marketing to. I mean, everybody's level of marketing is going to be different.
Speed limit or not, right? Some guys run 85 miles an hour, so they'll have higher maintenance costs, but they make more revenue per mile. Everybody's got a different set of parameters, and I think that's a really important point. My numbers are kind of broad brush guides, a bit like the ATRI reports, $1.85 a mile. At $2 a mile, mine is a pretty good guide for what it costs a truck, because these are actual numbers. Like, this isn't a survey number; these are actual numbers from general ledgers of carriers plus my own. So it's a pretty good indicator of what it costs to run a long haul truck these days.
And Dean, you brought a very valid point up. Like, if you have a supplier that bought trucks last year,
right,
they overpaid huge, especially if they bought used, they overpaid huge. That adds into, until it kind of balances and the depreciation kind of matches, that balances out. Samantha says that requires two down communication, which gets lost in larger organization, or oftentimes pricing holds those keys close. The pricing department really holds those keys close, and it's a shame. And you know what, Samantha, here's the thing is, part of this industry, the one thing I found when I got into this industry, everybody's so bloody secretive. It's like, if I tell you this secret, then I lose that power of maybe you coming to me, and maybe not necessarily that, but it's like if I tell you that supplier, I'm going to lose that supplier. It's like, I found this industry to almost be like the I don't know, like the Masons kind of, it's a secret. You have to be on the inside circle.
My own leadership wouldn't share basic questions. What's LTL? How did you get that price? We just send it here. We're not going to tell you. What?
Yeah.
Tell me. Like,
we'll tell you how much you need to charge the customer. And I'm like, no. What do you mean? No, don't tell me how much I'm going to charge the customer. And I've had arguments with companies recently in the last year that have said, okay, they're saying, hey, you want to come give us some business? I'm like, okay, sure, I'll give you some business. I'm like, okay, just charge this to the customer. I'm like, no, what's the cost? I'm like, no, just charge this to the customer. I'm going, no. Like, I'm not 2 years old here. You're not telling me what I'm going to charge my customer. I'll figure out the cost. But yeah. And then Samantha says, there's no excuse. People like Adam Wingfield can help carriers figure out their costs and how to maximize profits. Absolutely. Carriers have no excuse to not know their operating costs and their necessary profit margins. You're right, Samantha. There is no excuse. However, there's always that however. There's always going to be those people. I remember when I was at Transcend Freight Systems, and we decided at one point to go all owner-operator. We just decided to get rid of all our company assets, and it was right before there was a big dip, and the timing was perfect, because if we would have been a corporate fleet, we would actually lost money. And I remember going to one of the owner-operators, and it was a brother team. And they were like one of our best teams, and they would haul. And I remember saying, how do you know you're making money? And his answer was, I have money in the bank. And it's interesting because, yes, he could have $100,000 in the bank. And it's like, man, and we do another trip this week and put another $10,000 in the bank. We do another trip this week. Like in 10 weeks, we're going to have another $100,000. And then you do then all of a sudden what happened to Dean's buddy, whose engine blew, cost $85,000, just for the tow? Or something.
Well, no, that was for the engine, the tow, and the new transmission that he threw in afterwards. So
so you have $100,000 in the bank, you're making money. Now all of a sudden you've been down for 12 weeks. You've spent $85,000 of your 100. You now go back out on the road with $15,000. No,
and refinance your truck most likely.
Yeah. So
and in the broker world, a claim like that, we call that a career ender. So could be the same for you.
DJ, think about that for a second. You hit the nail on the head. At what point, so Dean, at what point in time did your friend ever think this would happen?
Well, every owner-operator that really is a professional long-term, they know an engine rebuild is coming between 750 and 1 million miles. I mean, it depends on the engine. If it's a new emission,
typically $85,000 to rebuild an engine and stuff.
In 2022, you could easily pay $40,000 for a remanned engine, and you got to tow. And then what happens is you get it in the shop, and they find everything else that's about to fall apart on it. So you would always be thinking. I mean, if I wanted my Caterpillar rebuilt right now, I'm at 750,000 miles. I'm looking at easily $35,000 for a rebuild on that. Now, that would add resale value to my truck. That would run it probably the same amount of mileage again. So it's a good investment, but you've got to be a long-term player to be thinking like that. But rest assured, if you're running a pre-emission engine, 750 to 800,000. I've seen Caterpillars run to 1 million miles before you can pull the head off. But a lot of these newer engines that run a lot hotter with a lot more emission equipment on them, they don't last near as long. So if you just bought a used truck recently that's sort of 3 or 4 years old, it's got a lot of emission technology on it, you're looking at an engine rebuild much sooner. So it's a reality. Everyone should be thinking about that. Last year on the show we were talking about putting money away for a rainy day. That's exactly what I was saying. Is that you've got to have that rainy day money put aside for that engine rebuild, because without the engine, that's your biggest expense in running it.
Not even just the drop in freight or drop in freight rates. You got to have money put aside to sustain the viability of your business long term.
Right. Yeah.
And Dean, I think you nailed it on the head when you said long-term player. I mean, pros in any industry are long-term players. They see the game. They don't just see what's coming in and what's in front of them. They're they're learning.
The career professionals. There's a difference between steering wheel attendants, drivers. There's a big gap between being a driver and being turning it into a career. The industry does a really bad job at turning drivers into career professionals.
Horrible.
There's a big void between just being a company driver. It's a really, really hard job, and it's hard not because of the driving piece. It's hard because you got to be a small business person, and you've got to think like a small business person, and that's different than if you've just grown up driving trucks. Like, you might be technically proficient at driving trucks and loading trailers. That's very different than doing all the book work and having good business partners.
100%.
Yes.
Good morning, Scott. Good morning, brother. Hey,
morning,
good
Scott.
to see you too, my man. Good to see you. So happy to be back. So happy. There's Adam. Adam kicked right in here. Samantha Joe's big time facts. You can run a business all without having visibility to your cost breakdown and revenue drivers. Unfortunately, it's true. You can't.
Yeah.
I mean, you can run loads as an owner operator, but is it a business?
Well, it's the same in a broking business, right? It'd be no different in your business, right? You've got a P&L, you've got margins, you've got operating costs. Like your operating costs. Yeah. And trucking's typically a low margin business.
Yeah, absolutely. You as well, D to DJ, Triple D Wednesday. Yeah, man, we're back, baby. We're back. Yes, sir. Yeah, it's insane. It really is insane. But you know what? Here's the thing, gents. In every field, not just trucking, every field, there's so many people that don't understand their costs. We're in the middle of launching a new company, and one of the biggest things I'm doing right now, I spend hours every day trying to figure out cost per customer. What's it going to cost to get a customer? What's the ROI? What's the break even after this point? What happens? And you got to lay it out, because that's your roadmap. That's how everybody knows to come together and say, okay, we need to do this. And it's like, okay, if our cost per customer is $67 and our product is $20, that means we need to keep that customer for a minimum of 4 months to make money. Not only that, the first 3 months is the cost that you have to pay out before you actually get the customer. So can we sustain it? Can we be viable? Can we sustain 1,000 customers at $60 a customer and wait 4 months to make $1? Like, these are questions as an owner you need to ask. And even more, I'll add another layer to it, okay, for everyone. As a broker, so depending on your setup, and I know there's a ton of different setups. When I was in the logistics world, my setup was there was me as the salesperson, and I had 3 to 4, depending on how well I managed the business, CSRs, working customer service reps. So one was a team lead, and I had 2 to 3 support staff. Okay, so team lead had a much bigger salary than the support staff, and then it was support staff. So I had that. Then I had travel. Then I had all these other expenses, right? Like cell phones, all this kind of stuff included. So the first thing I did every month is I sat down and I figured out my expenses, what the sales were. And based on that was our operating cost for the next month. Yeah. And eventually, after 12 months, I got an annual average. And that was number one key focus for the team was, guys, here's the operating expense. We want to do this as a team. We want to have team lunches. We want to go out and do things as a team. I added their like gift cards and all the presents at Christmas. I added it all in because it's all part of operating the business. And I said, so here's what it is. Here's the average time it takes me to acquire a customer. So based on this cost, this is my customer acquisition cost. And I laid it all out for my team. I said, here's the cost. Here's transparency. You guys want transparency? Here's transparency. So when you see $250 profit on a load times 5 a day, you're thinking, oh my God, this guy's making like gangbuster money. And it's like, okay, but you don't understand the back end. And I think that's a big issue. I don't think I know, because how many people work for brokers and say, screw this, this owner's making a ton of money. I'm going out on my own. Right. And then they go out on their own, and then they understand, holy shit, expenses are insane on the back. Just the negligence insurance, it can cripple most people, right? So all these things. And so not only do you need to, as a broker, understand your invoice cost for your company, but you need to understand your cost as a department. If you don't understand how much it costs you to get a customer, and I'm talking your salary, your commission, like if you're making 10 G's a month in commission and it takes you 3 months to get a customer, it takes you 30 G's to get a customer. Think about it, right? Like, obviously, if you're getting like 2 or 3 customers, there's a variable there, but just for simple math, if it takes you 30 G's to get a customer, and then you keep that customer and make $6,000 on them, you've lost $24,000 on that customer, right? Makes sense?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
I do need my glasses for Jeff's comment here.
Scott has for a few comments there too.
Yeah, he does. Samantha Jones, great call out to Adam, one of the best in the business, 100%. Adam is a rock star. Haha, good point, Dan. Business is business. Yeah, right. Jeff says it's cheaper to keep a current client on board than to find 100%. Do the math, create a mindset for client for life status, and work with that philosophy. 100%. 100%.
Find the pros.
Dean, can we maybe just give everybody a little bit of an update, just in case anyone on the AB5, and see where we're.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any change yet. I mean, all that's been said has been said. The protests have sort of died down. I think we're into the enforcement phase. So I don't know that that's started yet, but the next phase will be people enforcing the AB5 regulation, and then litigation and case law and precedents, all that good stuff follows. So it'll take quite a while for that to develop. One question I want to ask folks like Scott, and because Jeff and I talked about this last week, so anybody here that's in the broking space that sends loads into California, have they, as a broker, have they had any feedback as to whether that will change? So, because if you're a carrier running into California, as soon as you cross this, if you're domiciled outside California, when you cross the border, California law applies. So does that same thing happen to brokers? And is there an expected impact on the freight broking side of sending loads into California if you're an out-of-state broker? Because remember on the show last week, we talked about the CARB rules caught a couple of non-California brokers out. They were given violations because they were sending trucks into California that weren't compliant, even though they were out-of-state brokers. So there is precedent, and I had someone say that knows a lot about this, that same, because there's precedent, that same logic will apply to loads going into California. And that's part of the reason that I see folks like Todd Amon at ATBS, advising his owner-operators to deadhead out of California if they load in, so that they're not subject to the laws. Now, so again, I think that's all the stuff that's got to be tested, but I would love to hear from Scott or anybody that's listening today, that's even Lisa's over there in California, anybody, and we don't have to answer the question today, but if you've got some feedback, we'd love to hear it on whether or not AB5 in California is going to impact out-of-state brokers, and if so, in what way.
I would also love, if any of y'all have that information, DM us, because we'd love to have you on next week's show. I think that would be a really, really important conversation to have for everyone to really get deep and knowledgeable on that. So if you're an expert in that field and you're okay being on the show for an hour with us next Wednesday, we'll dedicate Data Day Wednesday to the AB5 and kind of the who, what, where, when, why, now, future, and kind of what we expect. So if any of you, like Samantha or Adam or anyone or Scott, if you guys are or know of somebody that is like top notch, top tier, DM us and let us know, because definitely love to have you on, because I think it's a bigger than just a comment conversation. I think it's a conversation.
And Jeff's comment kind of widens this aperture, right?
Yeah.
Because of the federal ruling. Yeah.
Chad, hey Chad, my world opened up 9 months ago when Dan showed us how to see our competition as resources and partners. I love being connected with other logistics companies, and DJ, Dean, and others have reinforced this. Thanks, Chad. Thanks, brother.
Thank you, Chad.
Jeff says Schneider's federal ruling against them regarding independent contractors, more disruptions on the horizon.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting.
Yeah,
but definitely, I
this
mean,
one last week. Yeah,
definitely. Y'all let us know what the deal is there. DJ, do you have? I mean, you're gonna have to have a serious comment to trump the
Listen,
total,
I think I have a good one. I think Dean will really like this one. Actually,
okay.
I'm hopeful for Dean really enjoying this one. Samantha just threw up a comment first.
Oh, did
the
she?
Legal side, nobody better than
Matthew.
Matthew. Yes, I agree. Matthew
Leffler on this one.
Yep.
I think on the legal side, nobody than Matthew Leffler on this one. I think about the broker carry. I'll think about the broker carry. Perfect. Thank you, Samantha. You're awesome.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I'll try and connect with Matthew. I'll connect with Matt.
Try to get Matt. Yeah.
Am I connected? I'll have to see if I'm actually connected. I think I am connected with Matthew, but we'll check off air. Sorry.
We'll figure it out. Or Samantha will help us with
I feel like I'm that 65-year-old that keeps putting his glasses on and on to try and see. And for all of you that are 65, I apologize. No offense against you. I'm not there.
I'm taken.
No, sorry, Dean. Come on, you're like 32.
Yeah, right. Double that, dude.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us like you do weekly. Dean, as always, man, I'm so glad to be back on here. I feel like the information you gave for brokers, especially the cost guys, this show, Dean and people like Dean in this industry, like Samantha and some of the other ones, Adam, that they mentioned. You got to look for these guys' content.
Can I interrupt you for a second, DJ?
It's there
I've
to
been
help.
wondering about something for since we got on the show. You got a little something going on that left-hand corner of your screen there, a little advertising going on. What's that TTC that you got going on there?
Oh, you see that?
I see everything. I see everything.
Yeah,
when you first got on the phone at your home office, when it was like, you had the in the background, the Yasaki board game, and you got all these subliminal messages everywhere. I love it. So what's the TTC?
Yeah, you'll start to see other ones popping up.
I have a feeling we will.
But yes. Just a shout out to TTC. Thank you for allowing me to use your studio. Just using their studio here. So that's
very cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
Very nice of them.
So thank you guys. But yeah, thank you everybody for joining us like you do weekly. Sales Chatter Live, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30. Except special Triple D days like today on Wednesdays. If you want to get the inside scoop on everything data, everything logistics, and just how to operate your business better. Don't miss the show. Wednesdays are it. Dean, the master, is here to join us. Hopefully, Dean, you enjoy this quote. I chose somebody similar in my eyes to you. This is a quote from Albert Einstein.
That's a massive compliment. Yes, sir. The man.
Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them.
100%. And Scott says, great placement, branding matters. Yeah, it was, Scott? That's why I said it's like, it's just kind of subtle in the background there. I'm like, yeah, everybody going to see that one. Everybody going to see that one for sure. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Now, tomorrow might be the first official hospital show. Going in for chemo today, so they keep me overnight. And then I'm looking forward to broadcasting from hopefully not my hospital bed, a chair, but y'all might see that side of it. So we'll see you tomorrow. No, all good, brother. No, it's fucking kick the shit out of this, man. No, all good, man. All good.
All right.
Rock and roll.
Look, he's got the fierce look on him now.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's all right. Let's get it going today, gentlemen. Everybody have a massively productive day. Go out there, be bold, fierce, and unrelenting in chasing your dreams. See you tomorrow, y'all.
See everybody.
Centurion Trucking. Our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion Trucking and start